All right, it's 12:05. I want to welcome everyone officially to today's Work from Home Wednesday webinar. Today's topic is supporting individuals through change. I'm going to be sharing a little snippet of some of the most important change management content I've been teaching recently to my clients. This has been a very popular workshop, unsurprisingly so, right now, as we're all undergoing so many different changes. And this is actually going to be teaching a concept that I've been thinking about pretty much every day as I myself am going through a lot of changes, both personally and professionally, as I transition all of my training to virtual, as we're doing right now. Couple logistics before we jump right in. As is usually the case, I'm going to be sharing a recording of this session. So if you want to review it, or if you have a colleague who can't make it today, these recordings are all available on oakandreads.com and our social media, which I'm going to really strongly push today. Follow us on social media. We're putting out a lot of really good content every single day related to this working from home topic and other topics. As I mentioned, if you have questions, please put those into the Q&A box. It's separate from the chat. I know it's a little confusing, but I will be answering all of your questions at the very end. So if you have a question right now or throughout, put it in the box and we're going to answer it all at the final, in the final portion of today's workshop. We're going to go for about 20, 25 minutes, try to get you in and out, answer your questions. And so on that note, I want to jump right into today's workshop. As is always the case, this workshop comes to you from Oak and Reads, which is my company. We do interactive training. So we teach people the skills they need to operate at a high level with teams and as an individual communicator. So virtual public speaking, virtual engagement, leading teams through change, public speaking, a lot of interviewer skills. These are all some of the topics we cover with our trainings. You can view all of our offerings at oakandreads.com. We work with a lot of different clients. So regardless of what type of industry you're in, if you work in a team, if you have to communicate and collaborate with teammates, either in person under normal circumstances or virtually, we'd love to work with you. So please reach out. And we have lots of case studies about how we've helped companies in all different types of sectors. Today's topics are the following. We're going to start by looking at what's called the change curve. So we're going to talk about the emotional arc of a work or a life change. And we're going to talk about how you identify some of the behaviors that indicate where someone is on that emotional journey through a change. Then we're going to look at that same change curve, and we're going to talk about how can you coach people, coach individuals through this change curve successfully. So whether you're a leader or whether you're just an individual contributor in your company, how can you understand where someone is and then meet them where they are and provide support to help them work their way through the emotions inherent in any change. So really simple coaching techniques, whether they're a peer or whether you're a leader or managing someone, that you can start to apply right away. And of course, we're going to answer your questions regarding change at the very end. I'm looking at the chat right now, and I would highly encourage people to kind of scroll through this throughout. I'm noticing some really interesting reactions to change, and talking about some of the things we're struggling with. I really relate to what Michael's talking about in his chat post, talking about letting go of some of the things that we need to stay happy and healthy, exercise, fitness, some of these outside of work activities that allow us to reset and recharge. I know I personally am struggling with that. It's really hard to have that dividing line between work and home life, work and social life, because everything kind of happens in the same place. So I definitely relate to that. And also, I really like what Franz was saying is the success rate, how successful you are in adapting some of these changes makes it easier or harder. So a lot of us need that real-time feedback when we're trying something new out. If it goes well, that change becomes easier to manage. If we struggle, if we fail, if we're trying a new piece of software, a new type of meeting structure, and it doesn't go well, it makes that struggle, it almost compounds the difficulty there. And we're actually going to talk about that. That's really a good transition into talking about the change curve, because there's a certain point on that curve where we really want to start experimenting with new ways of working. But it's hard to do that at the very beginning, especially when we're experiencing some of the frustrations and negative emotions inherent with change. So on that note, let's jump right in. So again, two topics today, change curve, and then using the change curve to coach individuals through the various emotional states inherent in a change. So when it comes to change, I've really been thinking about this Darwin quote a lot, where thinking about, he was looking at species, right? Animals, plants, birds, and thinking about it's not the strongest of the species that survive, nor the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change. All of us right now are undergoing a severe amount of change, and the companies and the organizations, not necessarily the ones that are the strongest or the richest or the most well-funded, but the ones who are going to respond and think creatively and essentially move through this change curve the most efficiently, not necessarily the fastest, but the ones who do it the most efficiently and productively and use some of these emotional responses to propel themselves forward to do things differently, those are going to be companies that do really well. And the individuals in those companies are the ones who are being responsive, not necessarily fighting or refusing to acknowledge this change, but understanding it, embracing it, and using it to move forward. Those are the individuals who are really going to shine in this type of environment. So when I talk about the change curve is actually something that's derived from the Kubler-Ross stages of grief. So that's a whole area of research, which I would highly encourage people to Google that topic, because essentially the emotional responses to change are very similar to the emotional responses to grief. And what's interesting about that is the steps people go through and the types of support people need at both of those stages are really, really important. So what we're going to do right now is walk you through the change curve. And essentially what this change curve is it is a way to map someone's motivation or emotional state or morale over time as they process a change. So you can see here, this curve is what we're going to look at today. On the vertical axis is where someone's motivation, performance, or emotional state is. The higher, the better. The lower, the more negative. And it's over time. So the first stage, when anyone is faced with a piece of information that's relative to a change, when they're faced with a new change, a new piece of information, the initial reaction is typically shock and denial. So people hope it won't happen. They deny that this is actually going to affect their life. They try to rationalize how this isn't going to affect their job or their role or their work products. And people don't really change their behavior that much. You hear people saying, this isn't going to affect me. My role isn't going to be affected. My company isn't going to have to do things differently. And the example I'll use throughout this webinar is the change to fully remote work, right? Because that's the topic we're all here to talk about. And I would imagine a lot of us were probably, when we initially heard the idea that our company or maybe our office would go fully remote, we thought, well, that can't possibly be the case. That's not going to affect us. There's no way we're going to make such a drastic shift in our way of working. So denial is our normal first response. From there, once things start to become a little bit more real, typically what happens here is we start to build some negative emotions. You can see the curve starts to go downward. We start to feel anger. We start to feel frustration. In the stages of grief, this is typically referred to as the blame stage. Same with change. So we look to blame people. We also maybe blame ourselves. We look to block the change. We look to stop people from having to work from home. We start to get mad at leadership for forcing us to do that. You hear people saying things like, I can't do this. There's no way I have the abilities or the tools or the resources to do my job from home. I can't imagine, how could I possibly do my normal requirements from home? I don't have the tools. I don't have the resources. I don't have the people around me. That's ridiculous. What they're asking for is impossible. This is an extremely stressful and unpleasant stage. And it's extremely stressful and unpleasant because things continue to get worse emotionally, even after you move through this anger phase. And so the third stage is the lowest point emotionally, stage of confusion and depression. This is where other people start to ask tough questions, or you yourself start to ask tough questions about your role. So will I have a job? Will the company exist? is what I'm doing actually even valuable anymore if I'm stuck at home? Can anyone even see what I'm doing if I'm here by myself from my home office? There's usually a lack of ability to see the vision of where we're going at this stage. And this is definitely the lowest point emotionally. You hear people saying things like, my role is pointless. No one's listening to me. They can't even see me. So how can they know I'm doing my work? How can they see the good work I'm doing? It's a really dark time. And your goal as someone who is either a leader or someone helping people through change is to reduce the amount of time people spend in this confusion and depression stage. You want to borrow a term that we're all using for much more important things right now, we want to flatten this curve. You want to kind of flatten the depth, so increase the motivation level of that bottom of the curve. So you're not going all the way down. You kind of want to make it a little flatter so you can get out the other side without going so deep and dark with some of these negative emotions. Again, this is a tough spot. People can spend a fair amount of time here, but what you're trying to do is you're hoping you can get to stage 4, which is acceptance. And the movement from stage 3 to stage 4 is by far the most difficult, but also is the most important, because this is where things start to go in a positive slope. And what happens there, the moment you know that someone, whether it's yourself or a colleague or a family member, you notice that the person has stopped focusing on the past and has flipped their focus to looking to the future. So you stop worrying and bemoaning all of the things that have been lost, and you start to look forward and start to look at what are the opportunities I have in front of me. It's a really big switch. You will know when someone has gone from 3 to 4 because they start talking in future tense rather than past tense. And so you start to begin some testing of new solutions, new ideas, new ways of working. You start to say things like, well, this is happening, so I may as well get on board. I don't exactly know how things are going to go, but I know that this is real and this is with us for a while. So I accept this as my new reality. From there, what's nice is things start to get fun at this point. Once you've moved past stage 4 in a change, you get to what's called the problem solving stage. And this is the first time your emotions, your motivation, your engagement is actually higher than it was before you even heard about this change. So you can see it's the first time on the curve that we're actually above stage 1 in terms of motivation and performance. So things you notice when someone is in this stage is people are empowered to make decisions about their own work and their own activities. So people are testing out new tools. They're maybe doing things on their own. They're self-empowered. They're taking on new roles and responsibilities. Maybe they've become the Zoom expert, or they're the person on your team that you go to for questions about Microsoft Teams, or they've now taken on the expert in facilitating your team meetings over Zoom, right? Those are new roles that maybe didn't exist prior to this remote work environment. So you start to notice that behavior happening. And you start to hear people saying things like, I now understand how this new way of working can help me be more productive. You start to hear people saying, man, isn't it great that we don't have to commute an hour every day in traffic to get to the office and do the same things that we're doing at our home office? I get to sleep later, I get to make lunch at home. Whatever those things are, you start to notice some of the benefits. Now, obviously, you can still discuss frustrations. There's still things that come up, but you're noticing new behaviors and people are experimenting with some of those. And finally, the 6th stage is the new normal. Now, I would challenge people who say they're at stage 6 right now with remote working, because I think if you're there, congratulations. But I know me, I've been working remotely for years now. I still don't feel like I'm in the new normal. But if you are, that's phenomenal. And I would say some of the things you know at this point is you kind of leveled off and you're capturing, you want to start to capture what you learned about yourself going through this change curve. So it's time to reflect back, have a group debrief discussion, capture some of the things you learned, capture some of these new systems because they're now permanent, and have a debrief discussion so that you can use these lessons learned for the next change you go through. Because let's be honest, there are a lot more changes coming in the future, maybe more in front of us than there are in the rear view mirror. So you want to capture some of the things that have helped a person or people get through this more efficiently and use those stories and examples for the next change. So record them and put them somewhere where you can remember where they are. You start to hear people saying things like, man, I couldn't imagine ever going back to the old way of doing things. And I will be honest with you, I'm starting to hear some people who I never thought would say this, saying things like, man, I could never imagine going back to the office 5 days a week after this. I've learned so much and realized so much of what I can do, I can actually do better at home. And I noticed some of the feedback in the chat, people talking about being able to focus more, being able to reduce distractions from while they're working at home. Maybe we're not all going to want to stay at home for 5 days a week, but understanding all of these new skills we're building to build habits and build tools and build our home working habits and environments, that's all good learnings that we're going to probably want to hold with us even into the future. So I am curious to hear from people. Here's a chance for you to react and to give me a little feedback in the chat box. And again, select in the chat box to send to all panelists and attendees, because I'm noticing some of the feedback just went to me as a panelist. So I'm hoarding all of your great comments. Select that little blue box and send it to all panelists and attendees. Where would you place yourself on this change curve right now? Are you a 1? Are you still in shock and denial? Maybe you've moved through, maybe you're still feeling some of that anger just today, right? Because it may be different tomorrow. It may felt differently than yesterday. What stage would you place yourself in terms of remote work? I'm seeing some come in, which is great. And yeah, we see some 4s to 5s. We got a 4.5 kind of moving between acceptance and problem solving. And, maybe I guess acceptance. And so I see some early ones too. Maybe some people are still at 3, right? Still dealing with some of these difficulties and still trying to pull yourself out of there. And I see some folks 4, 5, and 6. So I love people who answer multiple stages, because that's something I think is a very real aspect of the change curve. It doesn't necessarily move in one direction. I know I put time on the x-axis, so I'm kind of going backwards on this, but in reality, especially for a situation like we are in now, where there's so much change happening in so many different aspects, we can move back and forth a little bit on this curve day to day. I know for me personally, there are some days, even this week, where I wake up and I'm totally confused about what I should be doing just later that day. And then there's some days like today where I feel really great about direction I'm going in. I'm in stage 5. And I've got a lot of ideas about new topics, new workshops, new people to reach out to. I ping pong back and forth, right? There's just too much going on to say that I'm permanently in 4 or 5 or 6. It's just not realistic. And so we got some people changing, and okay, we got some teenagers pulling you back into stage 2 and 3. Again, that's another great point. You may have different curves for different parts of your life. You may be in one place with work, feeling excellent, right? I got a new role, I'm taking on new challenges. And you may be all the way back in 2 or 3 with family and kids, because you're just trying to wear the hat of work, home teacher, as well as managing a household, as well as working alongside a partner or a spouse. You can be in different places. We all have multiple change curves going on simultaneously right now. And so it's helpful to acknowledge you may be in different stages relative to different challenges. So I do want to move on. Great feedback here in the chat box. Please continue that, because I think it's helpful to see that a lot of us are feeling some of the same challenges. Now, what I want to do is talk about what we can do once we've identified where you are or where someone on your team is. How do we coach people through this change curve? So we're going to go back to the same image. And what you want to think about is, how can I provide support to my colleagues, to my family, friends, and partners, or to myself? What kind of support do I need based on where I am on this curve? So when you find yourself or someone in the early stages, shock and denial, or even just anger and frustration, the most important thing you can do is provide clear context and clear information. A person at that stage is nowhere near ready to start to experiment or brainstorm about new ways of working, right? We're going to save that for later. What they need to know is what is true, what's going on, what are the facts, what's reality, and what are the support systems that exist that they can go to for resources. So you want to be sharing information, sharing true, honest research, sharing any risk analysis, maybe at work that you've done to plan for an event like this. You want to explain why it's really important, specifically for remote from work from home, why it's important that everyone's doing this. Again, we're probably past this with a lot of our teams, but for the next change, thinking about what is the clear, concise information I can do and share to help someone process this change on the early front end. And another thing to think strategically, especially in a team context, is it's really important to make sure that you're having a lot of one-on-one conversations and dealing with some of this anger and frustration in a one-on-one or very small group setting. If you gather your whole team together, 5, 10 people on a Zoom call, while a lot of people are feeling stage 2 anger and frustration, you run the risk of creating some groupthink and amplifying some of the anger without a clear outlet for it. So instead of gathering everyone together and kind of increasing the anger through an echo effect, you're a lot better off sharing documentation, sharing information that people can read on their own, and then meeting with people one-on-one so they're not amplifying each other's anger. It sounds a little cold, but strategically it's going to help people deal with their own anger and not absorb the anger of other people that they're working alongside. The next phase is when someone is in stage 3, in the confusion and the depths of that depression. What you want to provide there is a sounding board and pure emotional support. So you want to be a great listener. You want to validate their feelings. You do not want to force them out of here by saying, get over it or deal with it. I'm working with a lot of groups right now where that seems to be some of the strategy, and that is not going to help, right? Someone is feeling these feelings. They're valid feelings, right? We're going through a lot of really tough change, and telling someone to get over it, if you've ever heard that when you are feeling confused and depressed, it only makes it worse, right? So you want to essentially just be someone who can listen, acknowledge, and validate those feelings, because the person who's in stage 3 needs to pull themselves out of it, and they can't be pushed. One way you can help them pull themselves out is to dangle some exciting opportunities that await them if they find themselves in stage 4 or 5. So saying things like, hey, when you're ready, we're having a weekly call where we're brainstorming new ideas for remote collaboration setups, for new tools we're using, new virtual meeting frameworks. When you're ready, come join us. We'd love to see you there. That gives someone kind of a carrot at the end of a stick to get them to think about, all right, if I can get to acceptance, there's some interesting opportunities for me. But saying things like, you got to get over it, show up, change your attitude, not going to work, right? So you want to just be there as an emotional sounding board. That's the best you can offer at this stage. And then ideally, you've minimized the time at the bottom of this curve. So for your colleagues or the people you're managing, once they get to stage 4, once you hear them saying things like, well, I'm here, we're doing this, what can we do differently? Then things actually start to become kind of fun, right? Because now as a peer coach or as a leader, you get to play the role of brainstormer or facilitator or problem-solving support, where you get to push someone to try out new types of approaches or new tools, or you get to play around and experiment and test and learn. And especially if you're in a leadership position, you want to really be encouraging test and learn by embracing failure and showing how you as a leader are also learning from your mistakes. Publicly sharing some of the Zoom fails that you've had or some of the errors that you've learned from and how you got better is going to make people feel a lot more comfortable trying out new approaches and trying out new techniques. And I see a comment here, embracing failure is much easier said than done. That is very true. And that is also a company-wide or a cultural challenge that you're going to have to work on. Because a lot of times there are a lot more punishments for mistakes than there are rewards for learning from them. And that may be an organizational wide challenge that, again, is something you can't work on the individual level, but is important to, especially if you're in front of a lot of people, demonstrating these errors, showing how you've learned from it. If you've been in one of my workshops before, taking a failure bow, laughing at yourself, and moving on. And finally, once you've provided some support for this testing and learning and being creative, leading some of the discussions once you're to stage 6 or you're walking into stage 6, and asking people to reflect backwards. This is also the best time in this third phase when you want to gather people together, because as opposed to the stages 1 and 2, where groups of people feeling angry together just amplifies that anger, here you're getting people to amplify each other's creativity and curiosity about new ways of working. And that actually has a positive multiplication effect. So it is useful to get those groups together, to get them in that flow state and to play off of each other being creative. And finally, running those debriefs, you want to get people to start asking, what have you learned about yourself by going through this change? I asked that same question in the beginning of this workshop, where I asked you to think about how have you done well, how have you done poorly, and why do you think that happened? Continue to ask yourself this question as you find yourself overcoming these change challenges, because you're going to learn a whole lot about what works and what doesn't work for you when you're faced with something new. And it's really easy to forget those lessons when you find yourself the next time at the beginning of this curve feeling the anger. It's hard to remember what it feels like to be on the other side of this curve. So you really have to write it down, put it in a place you'll find it, and review it. That's going to help you get through this curve more efficiently. So here's an exercise I would encourage you to do on your own, or with your team, or with your colleagues, or even, this happened yesterday, with your family and with your partner or with your kids, right? So this is called change curve mapping. So it's really useful to, again, identify where you are on this curve relative to a certain change. Then ask, where are some of the people on your team? And your team, that may be your family. So pick a couple people, 2 or 3 people. For those people, why did you put them at that stage? What are you noticing? What behaviors are giving you the evidence that makes you feel confident that they're at stage 2 or that they've made it to stage 4? Then take one person and think about, again, why are they there? What evidence do you have that puts them there? What are you seeing or hearing from them? And then most importantly, how are you going to coach them? Essentially meet them where they are. How are you going to coach them and provide the support they need to get to that next stage? And this is where the generic coaching strategies that I just talked about meet your personal understanding of what that person does well or how they respond, and combine those 2 pieces of information to understand, like, for example, what does emotional support look like for that person? Or what does clear context and information, what type of information do they really like and enjoy? What can I provide to them? Or how do I know to spark their creativity? What's going to be the best format or system for getting them thinking about testing and learning? So again, matching your observations to where they are and matching it to their personality, it's going to make you a really great coach to help a person through this change curve. All right, so that's it for today's webinar. I'm going to shift to questions. So if you haven't put your question in there yet, I highly encourage you to. If you're going to drop off right now, it was great seeing you today. One ask I would have of everyone on this call, if you haven't followed Oak and Reads on social media, please do so, right? Either on LinkedIn or Instagram or Twitter, or why not follow us on all 3, right? It's very easy. Hit that like button or hit that follow button. We're putting out a lot of really good content and we want to hear from you. That's a great place to stay in touch throughout these, in between these webinars. Also, please share these webinars. They're all on the website, and the sign up link for next time, which Athena is going to put in the chat box. Go ahead and sign up for that next week's webinar. It's next Wednesday, right now. You'll get an alert when we announce the topic at the end of this week. Really helpful to get those signups early, and we love to see that. And again, please give me feedback. You can email me, dave@oakandreads.com. You can follow us on social media and talk to us there, or find me on LinkedIn. I want to know what's on your mind. So we're, again, planning these topics week in and week out on the fly because it's helpful to respond to people in real time. And so, yeah, please chat. And again, if you want to bring a workshop like this to your team, we're also open for business as well. So it's not all free, but we'd love to customize content for you and bring something useful to your organization. So again, you know how to find me through email or whatnot. And we're doing a lot of workshops for clients virtually right now. So we're pretty busy and we're really happy about that. So again, I'll leave you with this last slide. If you have to jump, no worries. Otherwise, I am going to answer some questions. So let me stop my share right now. And let's go to the Q&A. Okay, 1 second while I reset myself here. Okay, so first question. We'll go to the most recent one from Camilla. What if you have a small team of 6 people and 4 of them are in the earlier stages and the other 2 are in stage 4? Okay, I had that issue and it was hard to navigate without making those in stage 1 and 2 feel unheard, or those in stage 4 feel stuck in a stage they've gotten through. Camilla, great question. So I think, again, here's where you have to get strategic about who you want in the same virtual calls together. I would say it's very useful to kind of increase the number of one-on-one conversations you're having. That way you can provide more customized support and feedback. I would say, if you have 4 people in the anger stage and the other 2 in stage 4, I wouldn't be afraid of really calling or scheduling 2 different meetings. If it's a team that you kind of would feel awkward to separate it like that, I would say use your best judgment there. But in a best case scenario, you're spending a lot more time working one-on-one, even if it's 20, 30 minutes at a time with the stage 1 and 2 people. And then putting the people in stage 4, maybe in a group together. So having a 3-person call with them and encouraging those 2 people to help each other out, to continue to experiment and use each other's positive energy to get to the problem solving and the creativity stage. So again, going back to that idea, separate out the anger people, work one-on-one with them, and then put together the stage 4 people and empower them to work creatively on their own and give them a little more rope, or give them a little more leeway to come back to you with some new creative, interesting ideas. So that would be my approach there. Question from Franz. People could be in different stages depending on the context, couldn't they? Absolutely. Yeah. So I think you can be in different stages in the same team or same group, and you could be in a different stage depending on the day or depending on a piece of information you read that could tumble you backwards or catapult you forward. It's definitely a dynamic system, I would say. And okay, Olga has a great question. How to coach when you're at the same stage as your employee? Great question, Olga. I think one of the big challenges we're running into right now with this change curve is that typically leaders are a couple steps ahead on the change curve when a normal change comes through. For example, classic, like we're going to a new CRM system, or we're reorganizing our sales team and changing the team structure. Typically, leaders start by knowing what the end goal is, and then they're way ahead of processing this change because they know about it earlier. We don't have that luxury as leaders because we're all reacting to external news at the same time. So if you're finding yourself in stage 2 or stage 3 along with your employees, you have a couple options. I would say it is still possible to be highly productive as a leader while still feeling some of these negative emotions. It is better to acknowledge them and not try to fight through them and say, I can't feel this because I'm a leader. But at the same time, you don't want to just walk into a meeting and just spend the whole time complaining in front of your team, you're really going to drag them down. So I would say find a way to turn your current emotions into an example. Be honest with your team, share how you felt certain things, and most importantly, how you yourself are working through them in real time. I think that open honesty is going to go really well. Again, within limits, rather than forcing yourself to try to get to 5 and not processing through those emotions, because there's inevitably going to be a tumble back. You're really putting yourself in a precarious position. It's almost like a false stage 4 or 5, because any small setback is going to pull you right back into stages 2 or 3 because you haven't actually spent the time there. The big thing is you can still be productive as a leader, even though you're feeling some tough feelings. You have to be able to hold both of those in your head at the same time. Push forward while still processing by yourself or with your family or colleagues who aren't part of the team you're managing. Finding another outlet for some of those is going to be super critical. A networking group, a colleague from school, a family member who maybe is in a remote area who's dealing with similar things. Those are kind of the support groups you'll need to set up. Franz, debriefing or reviewing is often sacrificed for moving on to new challenges. Yeah, how do you make room or time for reviewing? That's a tough one. I would say one, very simple, it's kind of obvious, but scheduling time a little bit farther into the future to have a debrief on the calendar. Maybe you're not ready for it right now, but putting it on the calendar for maybe 2 or 3 weeks from now and letting people know, like, hey, we're going to reflect on, I know with Franz and I, we know each other. So he's teaching classes in Germany, putting it on the calendar for a couple of weeks from now. Hey, we're going to be doing a review on how our Microsoft Teams classes are going. We don't have to be ready for it now, but just be prepared. We're going to do a look back in a couple of weeks. So just get yourself ready for that. That way you don't find yourself constantly just in the thick of things in the present. You're going to have to set some of those landmarks a little bit farther in the future. Let's see here. What else is open here? All right. I think it's been, Franz is asking about situational leadership model of Blanchard. Yeah, there are a lot of overlaps here. And I think I'm not totally prepared to talk about Ken Blanchard's work right now. But it kind of is similar from my understanding, but we can talk more offline, I think, because that's a great question. All right. So that's about it. It's 12:42. We got you in and out. Again, if you're still with me, please go ahead and do 2 things. Use the link Athena put in the chat. She'll put it in the chat again right now for next week's webinar. Takes a couple clicks. That way you won't miss it. And follow us on social media, specifically LinkedIn. I think that's a great place for us to continue these conversations, ask questions. I can share more resources with you. Let's keep this conversation going. Otherwise, I will see you all right here in my house virtually next Wednesday at noon Pacific. And in the meantime, good luck with your changes, and I will talk to you soon.